Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast and CincyJungle.com. I hope you are doing well and getting set for a fun weekend ahead for whatever it is that you may be doing. I wanted to get back on CincyJungle.com's Facebook Live page and talk a little bit about what the Bengals are doing, how things are looking, and what seems to be ahead as the Bengals are concluding mandatory minicamp this week. The big news really, I guess on the negative front, if you want to knock that out first, and by the way, if you have some questions or comments, leave them here. I'll try to get to some here. The big news really is obviously Jonah Williams and how what the injury there is. There are indications it might be a back tweak. It doesn't seem to be something as of yet that is very serious. It seems to be something that is there's no crutches, there's no slings, there's nothing like that. So that, I guess, on one hand is a good sign, but there's also some talk that the Bengals haven't even had him speak with the medical staff yet. So there's kind of a lot of mixed signals there, but that's kind of one of the big pieces of news, along with Clint Bowling also still rehabbing and being out of the lineup. So that has caused a shuffle on the offensive line. Different players are doing different things, playing different spots, that sort of thing. So, it's kind of it's been a positive because it has allowed the Bengals to play certain players at different spots and really try and figure out the best formula, especially with the guys who are healthy, and see what they have, especially at the reserve spots. But there are still some concerns about the offensive line, and they really need to build some cohesiveness this offseason if the Bengals are going to do anything worth of note on offense in 2019, because that's where it's going to start. Matt Schultz says Jonah seemed fine on Wednesday at the Taste of the NFL. Thanks, Matt Schultz. Good to know that. I unfortunately was not there, but that is a good sign. It's also a good sign that the team would have him be there. If there was something seriously wrong or something they were trying to really keep under wraps, I would think that they would, probably not have him attend an event like that, or at least not attend for very long. And this may be something just where Zach Taylor's setting a precedent in terms of how he's going to handle injuries and how he's going to divulge information to the media on that front during his time in Cincinnati. So, that just kind of depends on how you look at it, but doesn't seem to be too serious. And, fortunately for the Bengals, they may have dodged a bullet, but we have yet to get official confirmation on that. The other thing that, speaking of Zach Taylor and setting precedents, is if you really look at all the headlines, you look at the quotes from the players and kind of what their experience has been over the past couple of months between voluntary OTAs and these mandatory mini camps. It's the energy level. The energy level is definitely ramped up, and it's not just on the offensive side of the ball. It's not just Zach Taylor. It's throughout it's permeating throughout the entire staff. It's permeating throughout the entire roster. There's a recent article on Bengals.com from a good friend, Jeff Hobson, who he talked to Sean Williams and he talked to AJ Green, and they both said on their respective sides of the ball, it's unpredictable. In a good way. It's unpredictable in terms of what's going to be called, what they're prepping for. Basically, everybody's on their toes. And I think that is a good thing, because if there's one thing we have been angry about in the Marvin Lewis era, it's in the fact that they kind of are stubborn in terms of sticking to a game plan. They do not make halftime adjustments. They do not make in-game adjustments. So hopefully this fresh set of eyes, this fresh approach, it sounds like it's kind of doing, at least on offense, it's doing that. On defense, it's almost kind of the exact opposite, right? Last year, Terrell Austin was kind of criticized for being a defensive coordinator that threw too much at one time, and even in one game where he would switch things up and do things that they hadn't even really been practicing, it cost him games. So When you hear guys like Sean Williams, who was coming off a great year last year statistically, when you hear him saying, he's rejuvenated, AJ Green is rejuvenated, you've heard things, from all kinds of different players. Jesse Bates recently chimed in on some of the stuff, so there is a lot of positivity coming out of Bengals minicamp right now. We'll talk more about that in a second. Go ahead and leave some questions or comments. I'll be here for a few more minutes. I'm Anthony Cosenza with CincyJungle.com and the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, talking to you on this Friday as the Bengals have concluded minicamp, and really the big buzz around camp and around the city is the fact that this team seems to be rejuvenated and seems to be renewed in terms of its energy level, the approach by the coaching staff, and that has trickled down quite a bit throughout the entire roster. Now, what's kind of interesting, I was kind of a person who was very critical. Not very critical, but I guess I was very skeptical in terms of some of these hires that Zach Taylor brought in, right? You have Brian Callahan, basically an unproven offensive coordinator. There was the debacle of trying to find the defensive coordinator throughout the entire offseason. The Bengals finally, I don't know if you want to call it, settled on Lou Anarumo, but Bengals, landed him. He has not been a defensive coordinator at the NFL level, but there are pluses with that as well. And even Jim Turner, a guy who is kind of a checkered character past, there are pluses to these guys as well that are kind of going overlooked, right? So Jim Turner, all of the baggage, all of that kind of stuff, sure, obviously has some kind of good prowess as an offensive line coach. Otherwise, he would not be a coach at the pro and college levels for as long as he has been. But the other thing is the energy level. You hear him talk, you hear him address the media, you hear him talk about his position groups. That guy is wired, and he may come off a little bit as a different personality, but he is a guy that obviously exudes energy, exudes high energy, and that rubs off on his position group, right? So then you have the younger guys, Zach Taylor and Brian Callahan, two guys who are young, I guess hungry to prove themselves as well, and bringing a fresh approach, as opposed to some of these coaches who have been on the Bengals staff for a long time, or were on the Bengals staff for a long time, and Marvin Lewis and company. So, I think from that standpoint, you look at it, and it's not just the head coach. It's the head coach. It's the offensive coordinator. We talked a little bit about Sean Williams, talking about the defense, and Lou Anarumo. Jesse Bates is praising Lou Anarumo as well. So there are a lot of different reasons to be excited. Joe Clyer says my shirt is ripped. I know, it's right here. I know. I appreciate it, Joe. Appreciate you looking out. I've been at the pool today, so I'm not really worried about my attire. I was more worried about getting some information to you all. But I appreciate you looking out. I'll try and get that stitched up for you. Thanks, Joe. Andrew Bam Greer says, I'm excited about the running backs this year. That, I think, should be one of the most talented groups on this team in 2019. Obviously, you have Joe Mixon, you have Gio Bernard, complementary strengths. Joe Mixon is is becoming quickly one of the most complete backs in the NFL. If you are on Twitter, Brian Baldinger did a nice video breakdown of Joe Mixon recently, talking about how he is a very well-rounded back and should be, one of the top performers if he stays healthy this year for the Cincinnati Bengals in terms of statistics, especially in this system, right? They're gonna go run heavy. They're going to do some things in terms of scheme, play calls that will benefit Joe Mixon. I think, you do the zone stuff, you do the outside reads and whatnot. I think that will kind of play to his strengths. Gio will do his thing as a versatile guy. And then you got the two new guys, Travion Williams and Rodney Anderson, two guys who I think were steals in this year's draft. Travion Williams has already done some nice things in camp. Rodney Anderson, obviously a guy who is still rehabbing an ACL injury, but if he comes back, is healthy, and is anywhere near the guy he was in college, the Bengals got a steal there. So I think that that is a position group to really be excited about this year. Brandon Wasinski says, what's your assessment of our D-line's ability to pressure the QBs this year? I would have liked it a lot more if they had Gerald McCoy. I'm not going to lie to you about that. I think that was a guy that really could have brought, I guess, attitude, I guess, a lot of excitement. It really could have been, it could have been a potential franchise-changing type of move. It might have been an overpayment, especially for a rental deal, 1-year rental deal like he signed with Carolina. I'm relieved that McCoy did not land in the AFC North, but I think a guy like that to rotate in, even if it is paying that much for a heavy rotational guy, I think that would have done a lot of good things for this team this year. I mean, figure it out. You play Ben Roethlisberger twice a year. Everybody's on the Baker Mayfield bandwagon, so you play him twice a year. Now you got Lamar Jackson, a nimble quarterback who showed some good things last year in Baltimore. You play him twice a year. Getting after the quarterback is going to be paramount, especially for that Cleveland team that everybody thinks is going to, run away with this division with all the weapons that they have on offense. Having a guy to kind of neutralize some of that in Gerald McCoy would have been nice. However, he's not here. We got to move on. I still think there's a lot of talent on this defensive line. It starts obviously with Atkins and Dunlap. Basically, those guys are good for about 20 sacks a year. I mean, that combined. That's pretty much what they've been doing ever since 2010. You can kind of more or less count on that. I think you're going to start to see a decline. Maybe not this year, but maybe in 2020, you're going to start to see that age kind of catch up with those guys a little bit. Sam Hubbard showed some nice things last year. I don't know that he is an every down defensive end, but he's going to get a shot. Carl Lawson, a guy that plays well when he's in the lineup, but he's got to be a guy that he's got to be a guy who's healthy and ready to go out there. So from all of those standpoints, there's a lot of talent. Obviously, the Bengals have basically used some high picks on some of those guys. Where I worry about with the defensive line, Geno Atkins last year, to me, towards the end of the year, looked a little gassed. The guy that's kind of forgotten in this mix is Ryan Glasgow. And when he went down, you noticed that Geno Atkins, his production was still solid, but he had to take more snaps maybe than you would have liked to have seen. Granted, you want him out there as much as possible, but still, you got to spell these guys somewhat. And I don't think that was as much of an option. Then as you went in later to the year, there's all these cycling of different players. I think Christian Ringo was in there, and some other guys that they kept getting hurt. So I worry a little bit, I guess, about the depth. I worry a little bit about Carl Lawson coming back from injury and being effective, but for the most part, I think the talent's there. Seeing a bunch of other questions and comments. Let's see here. Robert Obrecht says, chances are they sign Green and Boyd before camp. I've said this for a while. I think that what they end up doing, and maybe what they should end up doing, I don't know, but what they end up doing is maybe tagging one of them and signing one of them long term. An argument can be made, meaning franchise tagging them next year and then getting one of those deals done this summer. Now, an argument could be made for either or, right? I mean, Tyler Boyd had a decent rookie season, kind of had a slump in his second season, had the breakout third year. So now you go, okay, was that kind of an anomaly because Green was out towards the end of the year, Eifert was out, all that kind of stuff? Or is he starting to show that he is a 1B or a 2A type of receiver in the NFL truly? And I think he is, but some of those guys get paid more than maybe they should, or I don't know. So an argument could be made that maybe you tag Boyd next year, you sign AJ Green to a deal that keeps him in Cincinnati for the rest of his career. You let Boyd kind of play on that franchise deal, and then you potentially work another contract next year. Vice versa, it can make sense, right? You sign the younger guy in Boyd long term, and you kind of see what you get from AJ this year. You franchise AJ one more time, see if he can still perform at a high level. So I think maybe that's the route you go, or they will go. But I mean, in an ideal world, they would like to get. I'm sure they would like to get both of those guys done long term. Here's my thing. I think there's not really a reason for them not to be able to do that, right? They weren't overly active in outside free agency. They didn't sign Gerald McCoy recently. That would have cost them a lot of money. They have explained to fans through Bengals.com and other areas that they specifically don't do that because they want to retain their own guys before they hit free agency. So there is no real reason, other than them potentially lowballing or being, I hate to use the word, cheap, for them not to be able to hold on to those guys, both of them, or not get those deals done this summer. We've seen that, but we've seen them spend a lot of money in summers before. Last year they extended both Atkins and Dunlap and spent a lot of money there. So that's it definitely can happen. I expect at least one of them to get done this summer. We'll just see which one it is. Again, this is Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast and, of course, CincyJungle.com. We're on CincyJungle.com's Facebook Live right now. We're going to get out of here in just a couple of minutes. In case you're new to CincyJungle.com, you can definitely keep it to that site for all the news, opinions, analysis, all kinds of cool stuff on that site. And then, of course, our podcast, which is the official podcast of that site and part of the SB Nation Network, can be found wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone. We have a YouTube channel, so subscribe to that if you are into podcasts and like hearing about the Bengals. I do that show along with John Sheeran, who is a fellow contributor at CincyJungle.com. Jason Hughes asked what's going on with the Alabama offensive line draft pick. I talked about that earlier, Jason, so hit rewind, buddy. I think this is Gerald Christian. How dangerous can our offense be if we I believe it was meant to say block with Zach Taylor's scheme? Incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. You saw what the Rams were able to do. Again, I caution Bengals fans, if you are expecting the Bengals offense to be as potent as the Rams offense was last year, maybe temper your expectations a little bit. I think that can definitely be the ceiling. There's talent there. Andy Dalton could play at a Jared Goff level. Joe Mixon could play, maybe not at, but very near a Todd Gurley level if he's healthy and things go right. They've got Gio Bernard, they've got AJ Green, Tyler Eifert, Tyler Boyd. If John Ross takes a nice step forward, there's a lot of weapons there. That's for sure. There are some good players on the offensive line, and to the Bengals' credit, over the past 2 off seasons, they have spent a lot of capital on the offensive line, but there are question marks, right? We talked about Jonah Williams being injured. I don't think that's a long-term issue, but we'll see. Clint Bowling, I think, is still one of, if not the most talented offensive lineman that they have, and he hasn't been on the field. Some people are worried about his future. Cordy Glenn, how would he do at left guard, a position he has never played in the NFL, played it in college. So, there are a lot of question marks, but if the blocking holds up, I think this offense can be very dangerous. You look at what the Rams did last year in their offense. They had Whitworth, they had Roger Saffold, John Sullivan. I mean, they had a lot of good offensive linemen there, and they played well. They did a lot of different things, and it got them to a Super Bowl. So I think the big thing for the offensive line, I've said this on the show, I said this earlier on this episode, I've seen it, I've talked about it on the website. Cohesion is the key, and I think once the Bengals identify the best five offensive linemen at their respective best 5 spots, they'll be able to create something that will be very dangerous on offense. I think if the Bengals are slightly above average on the offensive line, even average-ish to above average, I think you're going to see a good season from the Bengals, especially on offense. I think if it's a little more the same of last year, 2017, those two seasons, I think if it's closer to that, I think the Bengals are in for a long year. I think right tackle Bobby Hart's going to be the big one to look at, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to get out of here in just a second, but Eric Guess, real quick, just to rehash that, do you think we fixed the defense through the draft? I don't know if the Bengals defense will be fixed. I think it will be better, and I think part of the problem, there were two problems last year. Injuries were big, obviously, to many starters, and then the other issue is that, as I mentioned earlier in this little video here, they got thrown too many things too quickly, oftentimes in the same game. They tried to switch things up too quickly, and guys got basically confused, or they were running things that they didn't really do in practice. So I think from that standpoint, I think from all of that, you're going to see a defense that is a bit more disciplined. Maybe they don't make the interceptions and the turnovers that they made, those big plays they made early last season. Maybe they don't make as many of those, but I think you're going to see more sound tackling. I think you're going to see guys in better spots. They're going to be able to get off the field a little more frequently, and that in turn obviously helps the offense and point opportunities there. So that's kind of my take on the defense, and you're hearing a lot of good things from Dre Kirkpatrick, Jesse Bates, William Jackson is energized. I mentioned Sean Williams. All those guys have said a lot of good things. Anyway, we're going to get out of here, but the bottom line is the Bengals have done a lot of good things through these first couple of camps. There are some injuries to worry about, but for the most part, the players seem re-energized, and that is good news based on what's happened. Again, I'm Anthony Cosenza with CincyJungle.com and the Orange and Black Insider. Keep it to CincyJungle.com for all the news, opinions, analysis. Check out our podcast while you're at it. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Have a fun and safe weekend.